welcome. You're with Davos Direct, bringing you all the news from the World Economic Forum. Today, there have been plenty of big guests, and of course, it's quite the place for all economists to give us a sense of where our world economy is headed. A special lineup. I can certainly call this episode an Economist Special. Here are the people who are on the show. Let's give you a big picture though. Clearly Tim Geithner was the person everyone was listening to this morning, getting a sense of where the US market, the economy would be headed. He talks about a 2 to 3% recovery. Are people buying that? Let's listen to what his take is on the US economy given the current crisis and the level of the economy's recovery there.
You know, we still face tremendous challenges as a country. We're still repairing the damage caused by a devastating financial crisis that still has huge lasting impact on the basic fortunes of most Americans. Unemployment is still very high. Housing is still very, very weak. Construction is very weak. People still have too much debt. They're bringing that down, and that's still going to take a while to repair.
I've got two very special guests who will really put the state of the world economy in context for us. We've got Raghuram Rajan of Chicago booth. From Harvard, we've got Kenneth Rogoff. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us here on ET Now. I'll start with you, Professor Rajan. 2 to 3% growth in the U.S., that is actually great news for most people here at Davos.
It probably is. Of course, the U.S. was growing faster before the Great Recession. Of course, this is providing there are no accidents. And I guess one of the concerns amongst people at Davos is what kinds of accidents can emerge, especially from Europe, but also perhaps from China.
That's an interesting point. We should be watchful of what could come in our way, Professor Rogoff. But what should people factor in is the question. What kind of accidents are we talking about?
Well, I'm going to just reiterate what Professor Rajan said. I mean, I think Europe is probably still the worst immediate problem, although they do seem to be printing money, which buys time and maybe will keep calm. And China, you know, is an accident that's going to happen someday, and it would be very bad if it happened right now. And there were geopolitical things, Iran, things we can't even think of. The economy's growing slowly, but it's not super healthy. So a big shock hits, you might get a difficult reaction.
Are you, though, convinced with what Draghi has been saying? He seems to be suggesting a better situation for Europe in the last 2 months, and there's expectations that it won't see a break-off.
Well, you fixed one problem, I think, so far, and it's likely to continue, the liquidity problem for the banks. That still leaves a couple of problems. The solvency problem for the countries, which clearly not assured for Greece, but also in question for Spain and Italy. And the second most important thing, or actually equally important, is growth. How do you regenerate growth in Europe, given that austerity is needed over the medium term? Right. And that question hasn't yet been answered.
You know, I want to just be a devil's advocate and ask you, do we really need any further austerity? And, you know, haven't some of the corporation banks and even countries done a lot already?
Well, it depends on what we're talking about here. Certainly in the countries which are completely insolvent, and I, by the way, would have added Portugal for sure to Professor Rajan's list, and Ireland worries me as well. I mean, they have to change their ways. They were just consuming too much. They can't borrow as much. No one wants to lend to them. There are other countries like the United States, Great Britain, where you know, you could call it both ways, but my view is there's still a huge overhang of public debt, of private debt. Everything's a record, and I'm not even counting pension fund debt. And this idea that, well, let's just start spending money and everything will be great, I think is really misleading and a big mistake.
The nature of problems in the emerging markets are far different from these that are being discussed here. Are you convinced that that story of emerging markets lies pretty solid and that it'll prove to be positive in the next few years despite what's going on in the rest of the world?
Well, it can't be independent of what's going on in the industrial world. I mean, clearly the emerging markets have benefited tremendously from the growth of industrial countries. I mean, China's story has been export-led, but even India, the extent of the outside world in affecting India's growth is little noticed in India, but it has been an important factor. So they will have to adjust for the fact that they can't depend on external growth. And you have seen in China, when China tries to boost its own growth, the financial sector comes in, The same mistakes that are made here are made in different ways in the financial sector there. How do you keep growth going without creating booms and busts is something that emerging markets never solved until the industrial countries came in to overspend. When they ran themselves into crisis, they have to solve that whole problem again. We don't know the answer to that.
But this problem of overheating is not something even India is new to. For example, our regulator has been extremely strict about interest rates, and they do not want to be in a hurry to cut them to boost consumption. But where does one take that balanced view on growth versus inflation when the rest of the world has no growth and India is cribbing about coming down by 2%?
Well, I think it is a tough balance to strike. On the other hand, one of the things we find is that when you get inflation beyond a few percent, it becomes unstable, and you do need to worry about that. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that you want to bring it down sooner rather than later.
But are you more convinced about the India-China story, given what we've seen in Europe and the US, or do you think the attention would probably keep dragging itself back into the West with any signs of recovery?
Oh, no, I think that the emerging markets have just grown hugely over the years since 2007. They've become a lot bigger part of the world economy. They've been growing robustly, and the West hasn't been growing at all. So, no, of course that's not going to change. On the other hand, India in particular, I think, has a lot of transitions to make in terms of liberalizing the retail sector, liberalizing eventually the financial sector, building better infrastructure. There are many, many challenges.
Professor Rajan, what Professor Rogoff is mentioning is something that's been a huge issue back home right now, that we're stuck in a bundle of political issues. Do you think, in your own idea and discussions with others, people are beginning to take notice of what is inappropriate governance back home?
I think it's very clear that the outside world is rethinking the India story. Now, I think that they're overly pessimistic. Indians are overly pessimistic now. But I do think that going forward, there is some hope that we realize that we can't get growth without reform. That, we're settling for 7% growth now, saying, oh, well, 9% was too good to expect. I think if we settle for 7, we go down to 5. We settle for 5, we go down to 3. We need the reforms that Professor Rogoff was talking about to energize growth again. We can't take it for granted, especially when the industrial world is slowing so much.
Are we losing to Brazil, Mexico, Indonesia for that matter? I know Russia has a governance issue, but look at the other emerging markets. Are we beginning to lose out?
We're losing to Philippines. We're losing to, now, don't take Africa for granted. Africa is going to start coming back in a big way. I mean, reversing hundreds of years of slowdown. So my sense is you can't take growth for granted in this very competitive world. You do need to do the underlying sort of reforms. You need to give your people a chance.
That's an important point. Okay, final few words, and we're a matter of seconds, Professor Rogoff. What is the good, bad, and ugly at Davos, according to you?
Well, I think the good is that people are a little calmer about the world ending than it was a year or two ago. The bad is that they've resigned themselves to growth in the industrialized world. It's going to be slow for a long time, and emerging markets could slow down. The ugly, I suppose, is the Europeans' inability to find a really cogent long-term response to their problem.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I appreciate your time live there with us, giving us a perspective there, both for India and what we expect from the rest of the world economy. As I said, this is a bit of an economist special. We also got Ian Bremmer, who again, in an energetic way, tries to tell us why India needs to pull up their socks. There's no point being over bullish in Davos and underperforming at home.
I was just with the CEOs that PwC organizes for breakfast every year here at Davos. They do their annual survey, and of all of the countries that corporate CEOs are laying money down, by far the largest for their growth, 30% said the most important country for them globally is China. Now, the growth is there in China, but as we think long-term, the volatility in outcome, both political and economic volatility, as the Chinese are forced to completely rebalance a society of 1.3 billion people, is greater than any other major country out there. Maybe they'll succeed, but the world has never seen that before, and maybe they won't. And that is the big risk. No one's talking about long-term Chinese sustainability in Davos this year.
Yes.
It's absolutely the biggest issue out there.
In this respect, when you heard this survey, where was India? Were people more concerned about the bureaucracy there, or were they still talking about the growth?
They weren't talking much about India. I mean, the big story on India is it continues to underperform versus its potential because the infrastructure isn't there, the ability of the government to continue to follow through on economic economic reform is completely bunged up by scandal and the rest. I mean, long term, the demographics in India are incredibly favorable. They're not as resource intensive as China. Climate change won't impact them in the same sort of way. You've got incredible entrepreneurship. You've got a lot of businessmen that can manage. And the Chinese-India relationship, even though it's bad from a security perspective, from a business perspective, it's actually doing quite well.
Yeah.
So lots of reasons to like India, but boy, it's slower than it should be, and it's poorer than it should be, and that's the disappointment. Brazil still is if you want the brick bet that's doing well and that doesn't have much long-term risk, you bet Brazil. Beyond that, people are looking to other emerging markets. Indonesia's starting to, you're hearing more buzz about Indonesia from my perspective than India here this year in Davos. You're hearing a lot about Turkey. There are other countries out there that are going to be attracting a lot of limelight.
But you've met CEOs and you're hearing about people talk about India. My point is, are you worried about the economists out there or the politicians, or are you more worried that the industry, the so-called billionaires of the world in India, will not be able to deliver? What are you worried about?
I guess I'm a little bit more worried about the politics than I am the economics in India. I think that, again, Indian industrialists, even though a lot of them are putting big bets outside of India, they're still very committed to the Indian economy, and they're seen as very capable here.
But are they more hungry for the global story than the globe is hungry for the India story?
Oh, certainly. But the globe's not hungry for the India story right now, and that's just because India's comparatively small. India just isn't mature yet as a global emerging market. It just isn't China. It's nowhere near China. It used to be that you talked about Chindia, you put them on the same page. Nobody does that anymore. Yeah. It's like you're talking about apples and elephants, right? And the elephant is a little smaller in this.
Is India getting arrogant, according to you, because of the kind of growth that it did witness over the 5 years, and now it's sort of whiling it away?
No, I don't think the Indians are arrogant at all. I mean, certainly not the ones I'm talking to. I think they're increasingly cosmopolitan. I think they do very well in attending these panels. And by the way, of course, the Chinese aren't here. It is Chinese New Year right now, and they did not send a significant delegation at all, mimicking the United States this year.
But Davos is changing this next year on. They're changing the dates only so the Chinese can start attending it.
Well, if I were the WEF, I would be paying very much attention to the world's second largest economy. Of course, the fact that Chinese are coming here doesn't mean that they really want to participate in open debate on all the panels, which is also a problem. The Indians have historically overperformed at Davos, and they've underperformed every other week of the year. I think this year is no exception.
I don't think the whole global economy will fall into recession. We at the World Bank and the IMF have forecast slower global growth this year, and we've tried to focus that there are some serious dangers out there. And so we were counseling developing countries that some of them that were going to have to roll over bonds to try to do it earlier in the year where they had some liquidity.
This show brought to you by Reliance 3G. Switch to Reliance for the fastest 3G experience. The Honda City, exceptional like you.
कोई रोल नहीं है. I know everything.
मैम 14 मेगापिक्सल
I know everything.
मैम दिस न्यू एडिशन में मैं दिखाऊं आपको.
I know everything.
अरे डिस्प्ले के लिए मैम.
पैक करो. बेटा मैं आई तो थी तेरे लिए सरप्राइज गिफ्ट लेने, पर ना कैश है ना कार्ड.
कैश मिलेगा माँ.
बिना कार्ड के?
इंडसइंड बैंक की कैश ऑन मोबाइल सर्विस. एटीएम से पैसे निकालिए बिना कार्ड के. इंडसइंड बैंक, आपने चाहा हमने किया.
सरप्राइज नहीं है तो क्या हुआ? गिफ्ट तो मैं फिर भी लूंगा.
I know everything.
Reverse the effect of rain. Weather coat All Guard exterior paint with silicone that actually pushes water away. Truly durable.
If one has substance, people's appreciation always follows. That's why I go with LIC. It is real and rooted. No wonder LIC is a super duper hit. So why go anywhere else?
The right environment for your company is a place where innovation comes naturally. Visit idaireland.com.
Feel free. It's Galaxy Note.